For more than 1,000 years, Egypt had been ruled by men. Then came Hatshepsut. She was the daughter of a king and wife of a king. But that wasn't enough for Hatshepsut. This is a story of incredible achievement, secret desire, and a burning ambition to be king. This is the story of a woman who went for it all. There's a mystery about Hatshepsut that begins here, at the Temple of Dir el-Bahari. It's across the river from Thebes, the ancient religious capital of Egypt. 170 years ago, a young Frenchman, Champollion, walked down this corridor. He had just cracked the hieroglyphic code and became the first man in 2,000 years to read Hatshepsut's name. When Champollion came here, he uncovered a mystery. There were two kings on the wall. Now, one of the kings he knew, Thutmose III. He had seen his name up and down the Nile and knew he was a great king. But the second one he had never heard of, King Hatshepsut. Now, the thing that puzzled Champollion was that wherever there were two kings together, Hatshepsut was always taking the place of honor in front of the other king. Then things got really weird. This is his journal. This is Champollion's journal. And over here, he recorded the inscriptions, the cartouches, the names. And he noted that wherever there was the bearded pharaoh, the verbs and nouns were in the feminine. There's Hatshepsut. She's wearing the beard of the pharaoh. And that's no miniskirt. That's the kilt of the king of Egypt. It was all confusing, and Champollion never figured it out. It took Egyptologists another 100 years to do that. Hatshepsut, the queen of Egypt, had decided to wear men's clothing and declare herself pharaoh. Hatshepsut's father was buried in a tomb cut into the mountain. This is where the treasures of Tutankhamun were discovered, where Ramses the Great was laid to rest. And it's all because of Hatshepsut's father, the pharaoh Thutmose I. 1,000 years before Hatshepsut was born, the pharaohs were buried in pyramids in the desert. But by the time Hatshepsut's father was king, all the pyramids had been robbed. Egypt had suffered periods of turmoil and lawlessness and was just returning to stability. Hatshepsut's father needed a place where he and his treasures could be buried safely. Thutmose decided on a secret burial in a remote valley where nothing grew and where no one would ever want to live. A site that would become known to the world as the Valley of the Kings. It was a bold venture, but Hatshepsut's father was a bold man, so the tomb was built, and Thutmose became the first pharaoh of Egypt to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. Thutmose was a fearless military commander. As soon as he became pharaoh, he led an expedition south into Nubia, now the Sudan, to quell a rebellion. He had to pass 4 dangerous cataracts, each of which could smash a ship to bits. He led his troops deeper into Nubia than any pharaoh had ever gone, and defeated a confederation of Nubian tribes. Hatshepsut's father was a tough man. Thutmose and his queen had 5 children, but Hatshepsut was the only one to survive her parents. It was in Hatshepsut's veins alone that pure royal blood flowed. But could a woman become king of Egypt? Choosing a king was complicated, often involving intrigue and power struggles. It was the kind of issue decided within the closed confines of a mud brick palace. This is a royal palace. It's a maze of tiny rooms. You see, the king had several wives, so he wanted plenty of space. Here's a throne room. It's where the king would have held audiences. It's amazingly small, isn't it? But the walls were mostly mud brick, so they couldn't hold up a really big ceiling. But wait till you see the bathroom. It's practically camping out, but it was state-of-the-art for ancient Egypt. See this wall? It's stone. It's a luxury. If you took too many baths in a mud brick bathroom, you wouldn't have any walls left. There's no word in ancient Egyptian for queen. What the hieroglyphs really say is king's great wife. There was only one king's great wife at any one time, but beneath her were minor wives, and beneath them, concubines. And all of them hoped that one day their sons would be king of Egypt. Hatshepsut was a royal kid. She would have grown up in a palace like this. Lots of women, lots of children, lots of rooms, lots of intrigue. She was undoubtedly bright, and she should have succeeded her father as king if she were a boy. But the king's great wife didn't have any sons that lived, so the line of succession wasn't clear. This was the kind of time when the son of a minor wife could become pharaoh of Egypt. When Hatshepsut was 12 years old, her father died, leaving the young girl as the only pure royal heir. But Egypt needed a king. So Hatshepsut was married to her half-brother, Thutmose, named after his father. He was only half royal, the son of a minor wife, so he needed Hatshepsut if he were to rule as king. Thutmose II was in his 20s when he married Hatshepsut, and so the 12-year-old girl became Queen of Egypt. There is little positive that can be said of Thutmose II. His mummy suggests he was far from the kind of man a woman dreams of. Hatshepsut's husband was an unhealthy, frail man with little musculature. He was in his 40s when he died, bald, his body dotted with scabs. He built no great monuments, raised no obelisks to the heavens, and conquered no foreign lands. He seems to have stayed at home when the army went on campaigns. Certainly not the kind of man Hatshepsut's father was. The best that can be said of his reign is that it was uneventful. This must have been quite a change for Hatshepsut, raised in a palace where great deeds and bold innovations were the norm. She and Thutmose had only one child, a daughter, Neferu-Re. By the time Thutmose died, Hatshepsut had been married to him for 20 years. It must have been a long 20 years. But at least she was now free. She was 32 years old, the mother of a young daughter, Queen of Egypt, and in the prime of her life.
Now she would show Egypt what the daughter of a great king could do. She began the most incredible building program any queen had ever undertaken. Deir el-Bahari was Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, where she could be worshipped after her death. No queen had ever built anything like this for herself, and Egypt must have been stunned. Nestled in the mountains, its clear straight lines allow it to stand out against the rugged background. I think it's the most beautiful temple ever built in ancient Egypt. For the previous century, Egypt's pharaohs had been preoccupied with war, fending off enemies. This is the first major building project since the turmoil. It's a beautiful work of art and a strong political statement. Divine order will be restored. The Queen of Egypt is capable of great things. It was the beginning of a wonderful new life. For 20 years, Hatshepsut had been the dutiful, silent wife of Thutmose II. Now, the energy she had inherited from her father was going to be expressed. Deir el-Bahari was Hatshepsut's coming out announcement. Once again, royal workshops began producing official sculptures of the ruler of Egypt. But Hatshepsut's portraits were different from those of her male predecessors. She was shown as slender, with an aquiline nose and full cheeks, a young woman, fresh and alive. For the next 1,000 years, her statues would set the standard. But wait till you see her obelisks, one of the great engineering achievements of the ancient world. Obelisks are one of the greatest achievements of the ancient world. Hatshepsut was especially proud of the ones she erected at Karnak Temple. If you want to see just how big an obelisk is, there's one lying unfinished in the quarry, still attached to the granite. Every Egyptian obelisk was cut from the same granite quarries in Aswan, about 150 miles south of Thebes. Granite was the only stone strong enough for such a tall monument. This baby weighs as much as 3 jumbo jets. It was an incredible feat to quarry an obelisk. You can still see the channels where workers pounded for months to free it from the quarry. Hatshepsut's 2 obelisks were completed in just 7 months, and she recorded their transportation to Karnak Temple on the walls of her temple at Deir el-Bahari. The obelisks were dragged on sleds to the riverbank and placed on one barge end to end. It must have been an incredible sight. But once at Karnak, the obelisks had to be erected, and that wasn't easy. They were 97 feet high and weighed 350 tons each. There's no written record of how the Egyptians raised obelisks. The current theory is that they were lowered down a ramp onto a large granite base. The obelisk caught on a groove on the base and then was pulled upright with a series of ropes. Want to know what's holding it up? Nothing. Isn't it amazing that the only thing holding an obelisk on its base is its own perfect balance? That's precision for you. On the base of her obelisks, Hatshepsut wrote these words.
She made them as her monument for her father Amun, lord of Thebes, presiding over Karnak, making for him 2 great obelisks of enduring granite of the south. Their summits of electrum, the best of any country, are seen on both sides of the river.
Hatshepsut had every right to be proud. In the 19th century, Egypt gave obelisks to France, England, and America. But there was a catch. They had to come and get them. And as they all found, it wasn't easy to move an obelisk. The Americans had tremendous problems transporting their obelisk to New York. In Egypt, they had to open the hull of an old postal steamer, slide the obelisk inside, and sail for America. In the summer of 1880, the obelisk proudly steamed into New York Harbor, around Manhattan Island, and was finally landed on Staten Island. It was next moved onto a barge and floated up the Hudson River to 96th Street. There, it had to be hauled quickly across the railroad track, where today New Yorkers play tennis. It was now ready for its painfully slow journey to Central Park. A special railway was constructed to transport the obelisk. Winched along railroad tracks by a steam engine, the obelisk was hauled through the streets of New York at the rate of 100 feet per day. Sometimes it took days just to turn a single corner. Working day and night, around the clock, it took nearly a month just to cross Central Park. By the time the obelisk was ready to be erected, it was the dead of winter. It had taken 4 months to move the obelisk less than 2 miles. Compare that with Hatshepsut's obelisks. In just 7 months, she quarried 2 obelisks, moved them 150 miles, and erected them at Karnak Temple. No steam engines, no hydraulic jacks, just manpower. Recently, for a documentary, a team up against a television deadline tried to erect an obelisk much smaller than Hatshepsut's. It was cut out of the quarry with modern machinery, but only manpower was used to position and raise the obelisk. In spite of weeks of effort, expert advice, and hundreds of helpers, they couldn't do it. It still lies in the desert, on its side, testament to ancient Egyptian skills. The score? Hatshepsut 10, modern ingenuity 0. Hatshepsut's ultimate obelisk is the unfinished one in the quarry at Aswan. It weighs nearly 1,000 tons, 3 times the weight of the other obelisks. But this didn't faze Hatshepsut. She was confident it could be quarried, moved, and erected. But it cracked while the workmen were pounding it free from the rock and had to be abandoned. It wasn't Hatshepsut's technology that failed. It was the granite. To do great things, you need great people, and Hatshepsut relied especially on one man, Senmut. She elevated Senmut, her daughter's tutor, to the position of overseer of the works. Hatshepsut knew him very well. She entrusted her only child to him. Senmut's good service to Hatshepsut was well rewarded. He was born a commoner, but rose to the highest offices in the land. Under the patronage of Hatshepsut, he was able to build a shrine at Gebel Silsila, 40 miles north of Aswan. This has always been a special place. Gebel Silsila means mountain of the chain, and legend has it that in medieval times, the Egyptians placed a chain around one of the huge rocks on the riverbank and across the Nile to stop ships from passing. The nobility had private chapels carved along the banks of the Nile to gain favor with Sobek, the crocodile god. This was where the rich and famous of ancient Egypt could flaunt their wealth. It's a beautiful spot, right on the Nile, peaceful. Tourists never come to Gebel Silsila. it took a lot of money to build chapels like these. And here, among the elite of Egypt, Senmut had his chapel. But you have to look very hard to find it. It's not visible from the riverbank. It's tucked away in the rock cliffs, but it has a beautiful view overlooking the Nile. Senmut loved views. There's not much left of the inscriptions, just enough of his titles to identify Senmut. He was a rising star in the court. Egypt prospered under Hatshepsut's reign, but there was a cloud on the horizon. Her late husband had a son by a minor wife. Her stepson, Thutmose III, named after his father, was heir to the throne. When he was young, it was natural for Hatshepsut to rule in his place as regent. But now he was growing older, and tradition required that Egypt should have a king. Hatshepsut's power was about to slip away.
Think about what must have been going on inside of Hatshepsut's head. For 20 years, she endured a marriage where she was merely the king's wife. Now, for 7 glorious years, she ruled alone, doing great things. She must have loved it. I can't imagine her ever willing to give up the throne. But there was a problem. If Thutmose assumed the duties of king, his wife would become queen of Egypt, and Hatshepsut wouldn't be top banana. But what could she do?
What Hatshepsut did next was totally unprecedented in Egyptian history. Egypt finally got its pharaoh, King Hatshepsut. Up to now, she had kept the title King's Great Wife. But to keep her power, Hatshepsut took the title King. This prevented her stepson, Thutmose, from assuming the throne. She was now shown wearing the false beard and garments of the pharaoh. How could she get away with it? The answer is that she was clearly an excellent ruler, and Egypt was happy with her. A court official said of her,
"The divine consort, Hatshepsut, settles the affairs of the 2 lands by her plans. Egypt was made to labor with bowed head for her, the excellent seed of the god."
Hatshepsut had to play the part of a male to continue running the country. But she wasn't pretending to be a man. Sure, she wore the false beard and kilt of the pharaoh. That was required for ceremonies of state. But she made no bones about being a woman. Even her name, Hatshepsut, means foremost of the noble women. You know, because she was such a good ruler, and because Egypt was prospering, I think people could accept Hatshepsut as king. How did her stepson, the heir to the throne, feel about this? All indications are that it was fine with him. He was a teenager, and probably just where he wanted to be, on expeditions, traveling with the army. Think about it. If you were an adolescent boy, would you want to spend your days dressing up for state affairs and greeting elderly dignitaries? Or would you rather learn to drive a chariot and shoot a bow and arrow? If Hatshepsut's stepson, Thutmose, was in the army, he was probably training in Syria. Throughout history, Syria has been a battleground because of its strategic location. The Hittites in the north, where modern Turkey is, always fought Egypt for control of Syria. Egypt periodically sent military expeditions, just to say, "We're here again," and Thutmose was part of it. Centuries after the Egyptians, Roman armies fought for control of Syria and the trade routes. Much later, in the Middle Ages, the Crusaders built huge forts in Syria when they fought for the Holy Land. And Crusader castles, like the Great Crac de Chevalier, showed just why the military was a perfect place for a pharaoh in training. Thousands of soldiers had to be fed, paid, controlled, inspired. An ancient army wasn't just a fighting force. It was a huge bureaucracy that had to be administered. Someone had to oversee the stables, the weapons, the chariots. Think of the problems. How do you transport and store food for thousands of men? Thutmose would have seen all of this. If you could run an army, you could run a country. Army life in ancient Egypt required a kind of rough-and-ready personality. You were constantly on the move, living in crude military camps, in the company of thousands of men, and there was always the threat of danger. As Thutmose would later show, that was just the way he liked it. And this suited Hatshepsut just fine. Back in Egypt, she was the undisputed ruler and was completely in charge. If you think Hatshepsut was a good ruler as queen, she was hell on wheels when she became king. 1 year after her switch to pharaoh, she sent a trading expedition to the distant land of Punt. This was a bold and dangerous venture that took tremendous organization. No pharaoh had sent a trading expedition to Punt for centuries. The expedition marched from a base near Thebes for 100 miles on a desert road through an area known as the Wadi Hammamat. Supplies for the trip had to be transported by donkeys, and each night the expedition camped by wells and refilled their water skins. When they finally reached the port of Qusair on the Red Sea, everything was loaded onto 5 ships for the 600-mile journey south. The Egyptian sailors were used to the Nile, where they could always see land. So on their Red Sea voyage, they sailed within sight of the coast. Punt was really far away, in the Sudan, on the border of Ethiopia. The expedition was a great adventure, and Hatshepsut recorded it all on the walls of her temple. When the ships arrived, they were greeted by the Queen of Punt, who was shown as obese. The Puntians lived in thatched roof houses, on stilts. This was exotic stuff, even by Egyptian standards. Remember, Egyptians had not traded there for centuries. This was the first depiction of tribal African life in history. The transaction seemed to have gone quite well. The ships were loaded with piles of incense, but also with frankincense and myrrh trees, with their roots carefully wrapped and protected in baskets. An expedition to Punt was no easy matter, and only a prosperous, well-governed country could pull it off. But that was Hatshepsut's Egypt. As Hatshepsut's reign of prosperity sailed along, no one benefited more than Senmut, the faithful tutor to the little princess Neferu-Re. He had already been promoted to overseer of the royal works. But about the time Hatshepsut became king, Senmut was permitted to begin constructing his own tomb, high on a hill, with a beautiful view of the plain and river below. It was a vast tomb, befitting a man favored by the king, and on the walls, Senmut recorded his titles. He was in charge of the palace, but he was also overseer of the granaries of the god Amun, overseer of the house of Amun, and overseer of the officials. He was in charge of everything. The tomb is badly damaged, but you still get glimpses of its past beauty. Inside the tomb are caves, and Senmut may have intended to use one for his burial. One clue as to how important Senmut was to Hatshepsut can be found in the broken pieces of his sarcophagus, which excavators found in his tomb. Like detectives, they pieced it together and discovered just how close Senmut and Hatshepsut were. She had given him her own sarcophagus to be buried in. The sarcophagus was in the shape of a cartouche, the oval encircling a royal name. The inscriptions, once for a royal female, had been altered and spelled out the title, Overseer of the Granaries of Amun, Senmut. No commoner had ever been buried in a royal sarcophagus. Senmut must have been very special. The sarcophagus was probably carved for Hatshepsut when she was still queen. But when she became king, she needed a new one for her position as pharaoh. So she gave her queen's sarcophagus to Senmut, so he could rest in it for eternity, in his tomb with the beautiful view. Given Senmut's privileged position in Hatshepsut's court, the sarcophagus, all his titles, the shrine at Gebel Silsila, and his vast tomb with its beautiful view, many have suggested that Senmut and Hatshepsut were lovers. This might explain why Senmut remained a bachelor all his life, which was very unusual in ancient Egypt. So it's not out of the question. If they were lovers, it had to be in secret. He was a commoner, and she was the ruler of Egypt. But is there any evidence they were lovers? The workmen building the temple at Deir el-Bahari have left us a clue as to just how close the pharaoh Hatshepsut and her favorite Senmut may have been. As the men worked in the heat of the day, they would rest in the shade of the unfinished tombs that dotted the hills. While they ate their lunch, they would frequently sketch on the walls. One of the workmen seems to have taken aim at his boss, Senmut, and drawn a figure representing him in his overseer's cap, making love to a female, wearing what seems to be a pharaoh's headdress. The workmen weren't alone in their suspicions. More than one Egyptologist has suggested that Hatshepsut and Senmut were lovers. The workmen at Deir el-Bahari had especially good reason to suspect this love affair. On Hatshepsut's temple, Senmut appears dozens of times, usually shown worshipping Hatshepsut. No commoner ever appears so many times on a temple wall. Senmut and Hatshepsut must have been very close indeed. Hatshepsut's image has suffered at the hands of early Egyptologists, men who felt a woman couldn't possibly do great things on her own. Herbert Winlock, who excavated Deir el-Bahari in the 1920s, believed that Senmut was the power behind the throne, directing the course of Hatshepsut's reign. On top of that, Winlock didn't like him. He said, Senmut must have been a conniver, if not an actual instigator, for it is difficult to see how any such course could have been successful without the assistance of the High Steward. Winlock had it backwards. Senmut needed Hatshepsut, ruler of Egypt, for his career. She didn't need him. But it's prejudice like this that led Egyptologists to view Hatshepsut, a woman, as a pacifist. Hatshepsut was no shrinking violet arranging the palace furniture. There is even a report that she led her troops in battle. The evidence is on Sehel Island, south of Aswan. It's an out-of-the-way place, rarely visited. Half the fun of getting there is taking the local ferry.
Teacher, what do you do? The professora?
Insurance company.
Oh, insurance? Really?
Again, yes, on July.
There's at least one eyewitness to Hatshepsut's military exploits, one of her treasurers, who went on a military campaign to Nubia, probably to keep track of spending and the loot they brought back. On his return, he stopped on the island of Sehel. Sehel functioned as Egypt's bulletin board. If you wanted to announce something, you carved it on a rock, except it would stay tacked up for thousands of years. Anyway, T, the treasurer, was so impressed with what he saw of Hatshepsut in Nubia that he inscribed an account of it on a rock. I've never seen the inscription, but a good friend, the great Egyptian Egyptologist Labib Habashi, wrote about it. I'd really like to find it, but there are hundreds of inscriptions all over the island. It's not what I'm looking for, but it's pretty good. It's a Hatshepsut inscription. It's carved by a man named Amenhotep, there's his name. And he was Hatshepsut's overseer of the works here. And what he was really proud of is that he quarried two of his queen's obelisks. There's the word for obelisk, techenu. Now, he had a problem, though. Hatshepsut was king, but she was a female. So poor Amenhotep wasn't sure how to refer to her. So over here he says that he was beloved of him. He wanted to be politically correct, but he just didn't know what to do. But I still want to find the other inscription about the military expedition. Well, I've had a very pleasant day looking at lots of inscriptions. I've improved my rock scrambling skills, but I haven't been able to find what I was looking for. There are an awful lot of inscriptions here, and I must have been looking in the wrong places. So let me tell you why it's important. Like I said, it was carved by the treasurer T, whose job it was to keep track of the loot the army took from Nubia. He says Hatshepsut was with the army in Nubia, and that she defeated the Nubians. T actually saw Nubian chiefs that had been captured brought before Hatshepsut. She was no pacifist. Hatshepsut was king of Egypt. She could do anything. Towards the end of her reign, Hatshepsut bestowed yet another honor on Senmut. He was permitted to build an even grander tomb, right next to her temple at Deir el-Bahri. It was extraordinary for a commoner to have a burial within the precincts of a royal temple. But as we've seen, Senmut was no ordinary commoner. The new tomb has some really neat features. My favorite is the portrait of Senmut, complete with wrinkles on his cheeks.
This is the first astronomical ceiling in history. They've even got the constellations. After Senmut, pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings would copy this. It's really neat. We know Senmut wanted to be buried here. He covered the walls with spells from the Book of the Dead. And then he had a request. O you who are among the land of the living, be you scribe or priest, say the magical spells for Senmut, the steward of Amun.
There may have been a special reason why Hatshepsut permitted Senmut to build his tomb within the precincts of her temple. Senmut's tomb tunnels straight towards the Valley of the Kings, just a few hundred yards away. That's where Hatshepsut had built her tomb. unable to express their love openly in life, they may have intended to spend eternity together. And you'll see, they may have pulled it off. Senmut died before Hatshepsut, and just a few years later, she joined him in the next world. Her tomb, on the other side of the mountains, is one of the strangest in the Valley of the Kings.
This is Hatshepsut's tomb. There's a lot of history here, ancient and modern. It was discovered in 1903 by Howard Carter, about 20 years before he found Tutankhamun's tomb. But when Carter found it, this tomb was full of rubble, washed in by the occasional rainstorm that hits the Valley of the Kings. It was as hard as cement, and his workmen had to chip it out with pickaxes. It was one of the most difficult excavations in the history of the valley.
After 2 months of clearing, Carter had to stop. The air in the tomb was so bad and hot that the workmen's candles began to melt and go out. Eventually, they brought in electric lights, something really modern for the time. They kept clearing the passage, but it never seemed to end. It turned out to be the longest and deepest tomb in the valley. You see, in the early construction of the tomb, Hatshepsut's workmen hit bad rock that wasn't suitable for carving wall decorations. So they kept going, descending, twisting and turning in search of fine limestone. They never found it. I really wanted to reach the burial chamber, but the same thing that gave Carter so much trouble stopped me. Recent rains had washed rubble into the tomb and blocked the burial chamber. Anyway, Carter finally did reach the burial chamber, where he found 2 beautiful red quartzite sarcophagi, one inscribed for Hatshepsut and one for her father. She had opened her father's tomb and had his mummy removed to her tomb for reburial. In death, as in life, Hatshepsut wanted strong men close to her. After Hatshepsut's death, her stepson, Thutmose III, at last became pharaoh. All his years of training with the army paid off. He was the greatest military pharaoh in Egypt's history. During his 33 years as king, he personally led 17 military campaigns. Palestine and Syria were subdued, and Thutmose pushed far to the north, crossing the Euphrates into modern-day Iraq. The new king was able to make such bold military moves because Hatshepsut had maintained the army. He inherited a prosperous, well-governed country and could have hung up his shield and begun to construct great monuments to his glory. But Thutmose III was not much interested in building. He seems to have been most comfortable leading his army, and this may well explain his relationship with Hatshepsut. While she was ruling as king, he was probably quite happy training and leading the life of a military man. The remains of a red stone chapel built by Hatshepsut at Karnak Temple suggest this was a mutually beneficial relationship. The dismantled blocks, awaiting reassembly by French Egyptologists, bear the names of both Hatshepsut and Thutmose, and they're shown side by side as co-rulers. They weren't competitors. But after Thutmose had reigned for 20 years, there seems to have been a change of heart. That's when Hatshepsut's Red Chapel was dismantled. Hatshepsut's name was erased on all her monuments and was replaced with the name of her father, her husband, or her successor. Any male would do. History was being rewritten. Hatshepsut never existed. It had been decided that Egypt could not have had a woman who was king. It was not the traditional way. Divine order had been upset. But as you'll see, history has a way of evening the score. Inside is her liver, removed by the embalmers at the time of mummification. Since her liver is there, it's reasonable to conclude that one of the unidentified female mummies from the cache may well be Hatshepsut. There is also the possibility that one of the unidentified males is Senmut. We know what he looked like. Ancient artists have left sketches of him, all with a slight double chin, a sign of prosperity. But they also show distinct lines on the cheeks, which is unusual. Winlock, the American excavator who found the sketches of Senmut, said, "As for the wrinkles, they were surely the feature by which he was known." Now, one of the mummies found in the communal tomb was described by the anatomist who first examined it as probably a high official, well advanced in years. It could be Senmut. What's really interesting about this mummy, known as Unknown Man C, is the deep wrinkles in his cheeks. I like to think that with all the tomb robberies and all the moving of mummies, Hatshepsut and Senmut may even now rest in the same storage room in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, closer to each other than they had ever hoped. Hatshepsut's 22-year reign was a great success by any standard. She initiated bold trading expeditions, monumental building projects, and successful military campaigns. It was a time of prosperity for Egypt. Yet Hatshepsut's name was eventually erased by the very man she groomed to follow her as Pharaoh of Egypt. So why, after 20 years, did Thutmose III attempt to destroy the memory of Hatshepsut? It probably wasn't vengeance, as some have suggested. It had in fact to do with the notion of divine order in ancient Egypt. The concept of kingship allowed for pharaohs to be many things: warriors, builders, diplomats, administrators. But it could not permit it to be recorded that a woman had been king. The crime that caused Hatshepsut to be omitted from the lists of the kings of Egypt seems simply to have been that she was a woman. But you can't keep a good woman down. Today, if you want to see the most beautiful temple in Egypt, visit Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahari. And if you want to see the tallest obelisk in all of Egypt, visit Karnak Temple and marvel at Hatshepsut's obelisk. Almost as if she could foretell the future, Hatshepsut wrote,
"Those who shall see my monuments in future years and shall speak of what I have done Beware of saying, "It did not happen," nor say, "It was a boast," but rather, "How like her this is, how worthy of her father."